I did not make a scene. I did not raise my voice or slam my hand on the table. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, excused myself to use the restroom, and made one phone call. By the time I returned to the table, the dinner was over. Not just that dinner. All of it. My daughter's name is Simone. She was 34 years old when she married him, and she was the kind of woman who knew her own mind from the time she was 8 years old and told her grade 3 teacher that the assignment was unfair and explained exactly why. She had a master's degree in urban planning from Dalhousie. She owned her own car, her own condo in Halifax before the wedding, her own retirement savings that she had been contributing to since her first real job at 23. She was not a woman who needed guidance. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a senior administrator with the Nova Scotia Department of Justice. I know how systems work. I know who to call. I know what language matters and what language is just noise. I say this not to brag, but because it is relevant to what happened and to why things ended the way they did. Her husband's name was Derek. I should have paid closer attention to Derek's mother at the engagement dinner. That was my first mistake. The woman talked about Simone's career the way someone might talk about a mildly interesting hobby. Oh, planning, how creative. And when Simone mentioned her promotion, Derek's mother smiled and said, "Derek will always make sure you're taken care of." Simone laughed it off. I let it go. I told myself every family has its own dialect. They were married in September, outdoors on Derek's family's property in Antigonish. Beautiful day, I cried, the way you do. His family was gracious and welcoming, and I thought I was wrong about his mother. I thought, this is going to be fine. It took me about 8 months to understand it was not fine. The first thing I noticed was the calls. Simone had always called me on Sunday mornings. We would talk for an hour, sometimes longer, coffee going on both ends. After the wedding, the calls got shorter. 10 minutes, then 5, then more and more. I would call her and she would say she couldn't talk right then. I did not read too much into it at first. She was newly married. She had her own life. I am not the kind of mother who needs to be first. Then I noticed the visits. Before Derek, Simone would come home to Dartmouth 4 or 5 times a year. Long weekends, March break, sometimes just a random Thursday because she had the day off and felt like it. After Derek, the visits slowed to twice a year, and then once, and when she did come, she was always checking her phone. Not the way people check their phones now, out of habit. The way people check their phones when they are waiting for something they are afraid of. The summer after the wedding, I drove out to visit them in Truro, where they had bought a house. Derek worked in commercial real estate. Good money. The house was large and new and almost entirely decorated to Derek's taste. Clean lines, nothing personal, the kind of interiors you see in a show home. There were no photographs of Simone's friends on the walls. No plants. She had always kept plants. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. Derek met me at the door and was perfectly pleasant. Offered me a drink, showed me around. And then, at some point during the tour, Simone reached for her phone to show me a picture of her friend Becca's new baby, and Derek said, without looking up from his own phone, "You're on that thing constantly." She put it away. I noticed. I did not say anything. I filed it. Over dinner that night, Derek had grilled salmon. He was a good cook. I asked Simone about a work project she had mentioned in an earlier call. Something to do with rezoning along the waterfront. She started to explain, and it was clear she was excited about it, the way she gets, leaning forward, hands moving. Derek interrupted her mid-sentence to tell me that rezoning projects always run over budget, and then redirected the conversation to something about commercial lease rates. Simone stopped talking. She picked up her fork and ate. That night, after Derek had gone to bed, I sat with Simone on the back deck. It was a warm night. Mosquitoes. We had wine. I waited to see if she would say anything. She asked me how my garden was doing. She asked me how my neighbour's hip replacement. She did not say anything about what I had observed. And I, God help me, did not push. I drove home on Sunday and I called my oldest friend who has known Simone since she was born, and I said, "Something is wrong. I can't prove it, but something is wrong." She said, "Watch and wait." I watched. I waited. I visited 4 more times over the following year, and each time I saw the same things. The interruptions, the phone monitoring, the way Simone would start to say something and then glance at Derek before finishing, the way she apologized for things that did not require apology. The dinner was overcooked. Sorry, the house is messy. Sorry, I talked too long. Sorry. Simone had never apologized for things that were not her fault. That was not who she was. The second winter, I noticed her clothes. Simone had always dressed the way she wanted. Bold colors, interesting jewelry. Nothing outrageous, but she had a clear sense of her own aesthetic. When I visited in February, she was wearing a grey sweater and dark slacks, and I realized I had not seen her in anything bright in months. I looked around the house again. The plants were still gone. In March, she called me on a Tuesday, which was unusual. I picked up immediately. She said she was fine. She said she just wanted to talk. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes. And then she said very quietly that Derek had suggested maybe she should scale back her hours at work because the commute was stressing her out. I said, "Do you feel stressed?" She said, "I don't know." I said, "Simone." She said, "It's fine, Mum. I just wanted to hear your voice." We hung up, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. In April, Derek's sister Pamela started appearing in Simone's stories. Pamela had strong opinions. Pamela thought Simone should take Derek's last name. She hadn't. Pamela thought the Truro house needed to be repainted because the current colour was too feminine. Pamela had twice commented that Simone was lucky Derek had chosen her, phrased exactly that way. Chosen her. Simone told me these things lightly, as if they were small and funny. I did not find them small or funny. I met Pamela at a family barbecue in July. She was perfectly charming with me, the kind of charming that works on people who aren't paying attention. She touched Simone's arm a lot while talking to her and said things like, "You know how you can be with the warmth of someone who means the opposite." Pamela had been divorced for 2 years. She did not mention this. The birthday dinner was in October, Simone's 36th birthday. Derek had made the reservation at a steakhouse in downtown Halifax. Not Simone's kind of place. She had been a vegetarian since university. But she hadn't said anything, or if she had, it hadn't mattered. There were 8 of us at the table. Me, my son-in-law Pamela, 2 of Derek's work colleagues and their wives, and Simone. I had driven in from Dartmouth that afternoon. I brought Simone a book she had mentioned wanting and a jar of the strawberry rhubarb jam she has loved since childhood. She hugged me in the parking lot, and I felt how thin she had gotten across the back. At the table, Derek ordered for both of them before Simone had opened the menu. She looked down at her phone, then put it in her purse. When the server asked if she would like to hear the specials, she started to say yes, and Derek said, "We're fine," and the server moved on. Simone pressed her lips together and looked at the bread basket. Pamela talked through most of the first course about a renovation she was doing on her condo in Bedford. When she ran out of things to say about herself, she turned to Simone and asked how work was going. Simone said it was going well, that her team had just received provincial funding for a new community development initiative. I could see how she tried to keep it brief, to not take up too much room. Derek said, and I'm going to say this exactly as he said it. She acts like that funding came from her personally. Half the time she doesn't even understand the financial side of what she signs off on. The table went quiet. Pamela laughed. She said, "Derek, you're terrible." But she was still smiling when she said it, the way people smile when they agree with something and want to signal it without saying it. I looked at Simone. She was looking at her plate. The colour had come up in her neck. She was 36 years old and she had a master's degree and 9 years of work in public policy, and she was looking at her plate at her own birthday dinner. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I picked up my glass, took one sip of water and said, "Excuse me for a moment." I took my phone and my purse to the restroom. I called a former colleague who had moved into a senior role at the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission 3 years prior. I did not ask him for anything official. I did not need to. I simply told him what I had just witnessed and what I had been watching for 18 months. And I said, I need to know what I can do for my daughter. We talked for 11 minutes. By the time I came back to the table, I knew exactly what steps I was going to take and in what order. At the table, Derek was telling a story about a commercial lease he had negotiated. Simone was still looking at her plate. Pamela was refilling her own wine glass. I sat down. I said to Simone quietly, so that only she could hear, "You don't have to stay. I'm parked on Barrington whenever you're ready." She looked at me. For a moment she looked very young. Then she nodded, once very slightly, and looked back down. We stayed through dinner. I did not speak to Derek beyond what was required. On the drive back to my house she cried, which I think was the first time she had cried in front of anyone in a long time. She did not say much. She didn't need to. I handed her tissues and drove and let her find her way to it. That night she slept in her old room. She had not slept there in 4 years. The next morning over coffee I asked her to talk to me. Not to summarize, not to explain, just to tell me the truth, in whatever order it came. She talked for 2 hours. She told me about the bank account he had suggested they consolidate into, and which now had both their names but which Derek managed entirely, transferring her a weekly allowance from her own paycheck that she was expected to account for. She told me he had said her friends were a bad influence, that Becca in particular was toxic, and that she had stopped seeing Becca in February. She told me he had gone through her phone twice that she knew of. She told me that once, when she had come home late from a work event and had not texted, he had grabbed her arm above the elbow hard enough that she had a bruise for 2 weeks. She told me that last part quietly, like a fact, like she had already worked very hard to make it feel like only a fact and not what it was. I wrote everything down. I am a person who writes things down. Over the following weeks, while Simona stayed with me, she had told Derek she needed space, and he had apparently not liked that, but had not stopped her. I started making calls. I contacted a family lawyer I knew in Halifax who specialized in situations like this one. I contacted the financial institution where Simone's pay was deposited and asked about what documentation would be required to remove a joint account holder and restore sole access. I contacted a counselor at the Avalon Sexual Assault Center who worked with survivors of domestic coercion. I did not do any of this dramatically. I did not do any of it loudly. I made lists. I made appointments. I drove Simone to every one of them. She went back twice to get her things. I drove her both times. She did not go alone. Derek called me once during this period. He wanted to explain. He wanted to tell me that I had misunderstood the situation, that Simone struggled with anxiety and he had only ever tried to help her manage it, that the comment at the dinner had been a joke taken out of context, that I was a mother with a particular bias and perhaps didn't see the full picture. His voice was calm and measured and reasonable. I let him finish. Then I said, "The lawyers will be in touch," and I hung up. I was told later by the lawyer that he had apparently not expected that he had expected me to argue with him. Some of them need an argument. They need to win the argument, and if there is no argument, they genuinely don't know what to do next. I had 31 years of not giving people the argument they needed. It is a useful skill. Simone's divorce was finalized the following spring. It was not simple. He contested things that did not need to be contested, which her lawyer said was predictable. He tried to claim the contribution she had made to the down payment on the Truro house was a gift rather than joint investment, which was disproven by a document Simone had had the foresight to keep, a simple email from 2 years prior in which she had laid out the financial arrangement clearly. I had always told her, put things in writing. Pamela sent me a Facebook message during the proceedings telling me that I had destroyed my daughter's marriage and that women like me were the reason men couldn't trust their wives' families. I read it once, then blocked her. It has now been a year and a half since the birthday dinner. Simone called me last Sunday morning. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. She has gone back to seeing Becca. She has started keeping plants again. She texted me a photo 2 months ago of her window ledge covered in them. A string of pearls trailing down, pothos, some small cactus I couldn't identify. She is back in colour, not performed colour, not trying to prove something colour, just herself. She asked me recently why I hadn't said anything sooner. During the visits, the dinners, the years of watching, I told her the truth. I didn't have the right to force open a door she wasn't ready to walk through. What I could do was make sure that when she was ready, I was standing on the other side, with the car running. She laughed at that. The real laugh, the one I've known since she was 4 years old. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had named what I was seeing earlier, not to Simone, she needed to find her own timing, but out loud to myself. I spent too long calling it a feeling, a concern, a worry. It was not a feeling, it was a pattern. Patterns have names. The faster you name a thing, the faster you can move toward it clearly. If your child is quieter than they used to be, if they apologize for things that aren't their fault, if they check their phone like they're waiting for permission, if you haven't seen them wear color in months, if they come home for a visit and you feel for the first time in your life that you are watching your own child perform being fine, trust that. Not as proof of anything, not as cause for accusation, but as cause for staying close and staying awake. I am 67 years old. I have worked inside institutions long enough to know that the right call, made at the right time, to the right person, can change the entire shape of what happens next. I put down my fork. I went to the restroom. I made the call. That is the story. That is all there is to it. What I would ask you now, if you're listening from wherever you are tonight, have you ever seen this in someone you love? Did you trust what you were seeing? And whatever city or town you're listening from, I'd love to know you're out there. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any abstract way, just in the plain, practical sense that actions accumulate, and what accumulates eventually tips. Derek did not become who he was overnight, neither did Simone, and neither, honestly, did I. The woman who sat at that birthday dinner table and said nothing out loud while calculating everything silently, that was 31 years of learning when to speak and when to move. I didn't raise my voice because I didn't need to. I had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that the loudest response is rarely the most effective one. That is not a natural thing. That is a thing you build over time, through failure and observation and deciding again and again to understand a situation before reacting to it. Simone is the same way, underneath. She had always been sharp, clear-headed, someone who did her homework before she opened her mouth. What frightened me most during those 18 months was not what Derek was doing to her, as terrible as it was, but how successfully he had convinced her to distrust that part of herself. That is what that kind of control does. It does not need to be physically violent to be devastating. It works by eroding your faith in your own judgment, one small dismissal at a time, until you stop trusting what you see in the mirror. Watching her come back to herself has been the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing. She texts me about her plants. She talks about her work the way she used to, with that forward-leaning energy, hands probably moving even when I can't see them through the phone. She called Becca. She wore a red coat to Christmas dinner last year, and I had to look out the window for a moment, because I did not want her to see me cry. What I keep coming back to is this. None of it happened because of luck. It happened because Simone, even at her lowest, held on to something true in herself, some small, stubborn core that would not fully believe the version of her that Derek kept insisting on. That is its own kind of courage, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that most people never see, that just keeps showing up day after day in 1,000 invisible choices, not to completely disappear. And I kept watching. I kept showing up. I kept filing things away and making calls and driving her to appointments and sitting across from lawyers and saying, clearly and without drama, here is what I know, here is what I know, here is what I need, here is what we are going to do next. That is what I know how to do. It is not heroic, it is just the accumulated result of a life spent paying attention and refusing to act out of panic. The thing I want to say to anyone listening tonight, anyone who is watching someone they love go quiet, who is watching the color drain out of someone's life, is that the most useful thing you can offer is not a speech. It is your steadiness. It is knowing what you know, trusting what you see, and being capable enough to act on it when the moment comes. You build that capability slowly, through every hard thing you ever faced with your eyes open. Simone asked me once how I stayed so calm through all of it. I told her the truth. I wasn't calm. I was just clear. There is a difference, and learning the difference is one of the most worthwhile things a person can do.